Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Murmurs, where dreams melt into shadows and stories float through your sleep, videos to fall asleep. So, before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying tonight's tale. When the walls start to breathe, let's begin. The house on Willow Lane was unremarkable at first glance. It sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, its faded yellow paint peeling like old skin, the windows dark and curtainless. To Lila Harper, it was a refuge. After years of city noise, honking cars, shouting neighbors, the constant hum of life, she craved silence. The house, listed at a price far below market value, seemed like a gift. The realtor had been vague about its history, muttering something about an elderly owner who'd passed away years ago. Lila didn't care. She was 32, single, and tired. The house was hers now, and it promised peace. She moved in on a chilly October evening, the air thick with the scent of fallen leaves. The movers had left her boxes scattered across the hardwood floors, and the furniture, a second-hand couch, a wobbly dining table, her old bed, looked out of place in the cavernous rooms. The house was larger than she'd expected, with high ceilings and narrow hallways that seemed to stretch endlessly in the dark. Lila spent her first night on a mattress in the living room, too exhausted to unpack. The silence was absolute. No traffic, no sirens. Just the occasional creak of the house settling, like a sigh. The first oddity came the next morning. Lila was unpacking dishes in the kitchen when she noticed a faint rhythm in the air. It wasn't a sound exactly, more a sensation, like the pulse of a distant heartbeat. She paused, her hands hovering over a stack of plates, and tilted her head. The feeling was gone as quickly as it came. She chalked it up to fatigue, or maybe the house's old pipes groaning somewhere in the walls. Houses like this had quirks, didn't they? She turned on the radio, letting soft jazz fill the room, and continued unpacking. By the third day, Lila had settled into a routine. She worked remotely as a freelance editor, her laptop perched on the dining table, a mug of tea always within reach. The house was cold, even with the heater running, but she didn't mind. She liked the way the chill kept her alert. The rhythm returned that afternoon, stronger this time. She was proofreading a manuscript when she felt it, a slow, steady thrum, like the house itself was breathing. In, out, in, out. She set her laptop aside and stood, her socks silent on the floor. The sensation seemed to come from the walls, though she couldn't pinpoint where. She pressed her palm against the faded wallpaper in the dining room. It was cool, solid, unyielding. Nothing unusual. Still, the feeling lingered, a quiet pulse that made her skin prickle. That night, Lila lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was dark, the kind of dark that swallowed light whole. She'd always been a light sleeper, attuned to every creak and rustle. But the silence here was different. It was heavy, expectant. She closed her eyes, willing herself to relax when she heard it. A soft, rhythmic whisper, like air moving through a narrow space. It wasn't coming from the vents or the windows. It was closer, intimate, as if the walls themselves were exhaling. She sat up, her heart thudding, and flicked on the bedside lamp. The light cast long shadows, but the room was empty. The sound stopped. Lila didn't sleep well after that. She told herself it was nothing. Old houses made noises, and her imagination was running wild. But the next morning she found herself studying the walls. The wallpaper was old, a muted floral pattern that curled at the edges. In the living room, she noticed a seam where two strips didn't quite meet, revealing a sliver of plaster beneath. On impulse, she pressed her ear to the wall. For a moment, there was nothing. Then faintly, she heard it again. A slow, deliberate rhythm, like the rise and fall of lungs. She pulled back, her breath catching. It wasn't possible. Walls didn't breathe. Houses didn't have pulses. She decided to explore the house more thoroughly. It had come with a basement, though the realtor had warned her it was unfinished, damp, and not worth the trouble. Lila hadn't planned to use it, but now she was curious. The basement door was at the end of a narrow hallway, its paint chipped and gray. The knob was cold, almost painfully so, and the door creaked as it opened. A wave of musty air hit her, tinged with something sharper, like damp earth and decay. The stairs descended into darkness, wooden and uneven. She flicked the light switch, but the bulb was either dead or missing. Using her phone's flashlight, she made her way down. The basement was a maze of shadows. Bare concrete walls stretched into the gloom, and the floor was littered with debris, broken crates, a rusted bicycle frame, a pile of mildewed books. In the center of the room was a large circular grate, its metal bars caked with rust. Lila knelt beside it, shining her light through the gaps. The beam revealed a shallow pit, maybe 3 feet deep, filled with dirt and cobwebs. The air here was heavier, and the rhythmic sensation was stronger, almost tangible. In, out, in, out. She reached out, her fingers brushing the grate, and froze. The metal was warm, not hot, but warm, like skin. She yanked her hand back, her pulse racing. Back upstairs, Lila tried to focus on work, but her mind kept drifting to the basement. She searched online for information about the house, but the results were sparse. A property listing from a decade ago, a brief mention in a local paper about the previous owner, a recluse named Margaret Hale who died in her sleep. Nothing about strange noises or breathing walls. She considered calling the realtor but dismissed the idea. What would she say? That her house felt alive? She'd sound unhinged. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Layla sat in the living room, a blanket draped over her shoulders. The house was quiet, but the silence felt like a held breath. She lit a candle, hoping the flickering light would make the room feel less empty. As the flame danced, she noticed something on the wall opposite her. The wallpaper seemed to shift, not dramatically but subtly, like a ripple across water. She blinked, leaning forward. The movement stopped, but now she saw it, a faint outline in the wallpaper, like the silhouette of a door. It hadn't been there before. She was sure of it. Lila stood, her blanket falling to the floor, and approached the wall. The outline was faint, barely visible in the candlelight. But it was there, a rectangular shape, taller than she was, with a slight curve at the top. She ran her fingers along the edge, expecting to feel a seam, but the wallpaper was smooth. The rhythmic pulse was stronger here, vibrating faintly against her fingertips. In, out, in, out. She pressed harder, and the wall gave slightly, like it was soft, pliable. Her breath hitched. This wasn't right. Walls weren't supposed to feel like that. She stepped back, her mind racing. The house was old, she told herself. Old houses had secrets, hidden rooms, faulty wiring, strange acoustics. That's all it was. But as she stared at the outline, the candlelight seemed to dim, and the air grew colder. The pulse grew louder, not in her ears but in her chest, syncing with her heartbeat. And then, so faint she might have imagined it, she heard a whisper. Not words, but a sound, like a sigh from a throat that wasn't human. Lila didn't sleep that night. She sat on the couch, the candle burning low, her eyes fixed on the wall. The outline was still there, and the walls, she was certain, were watching her back. Lila Harper didn't touch the wall again that night. She stayed on the couch, the candle's flame reduced to a glowing ember by dawn. The outline of the door, or whatever it was, remained, faint but undeniable, etched into the wallpaper like a scar. The rhythmic pulse, that slow in-out of the house's breath, had faded as the sun rose, but Lila felt its echo in her bones. She was exhausted, her eyes heavy, yet sleep felt like a betrayal. The house was awake, and so was she. By morning, the living room looked almost normal. Sunlight filtered through the bare windows, softening the edges of the furniture and casting long, lazy shadows. The outline on the wall was harder to see now, blending into the floral pattern unless Lila squinted. She tried to convince herself it was a trick of the light, a flaw in the wallpaper she hadn't noticed before. But the memory of the wall's softness, its faint give under her fingers, lingered like a bad dream. She needed answers. Lila brewed coffee, the gurgle of the machine grounding her, and sat at the dining table with her laptop. She searched for anything that might explain the house's strangeness. Old houses often had hidden rooms, she reasoned, Prohibition-era hideaways or servant passages. Maybe the outline was a sealed door, and the sounds were air moving through forgotten ducts. She typed Willow Lane history and Margaret Hale obituary into the search bar, but the results were as sparse as before. A grainy photo from a 1990s real estate listing showed the house looking much the same, if fresher. The obituary was brief. Margaret Hale, 78, found dead in her home. No surviving family. The cause was listed as natural, though one forum post, buried in a local history thread, hinted at rumors. They say she never left that house, the anonymous user wrote. People saw lights on at night, but no one ever saw her. Creepy place. Lila frowned. Rumors weren't facts, but they were something. She searched for breathing walls and house noises, hoping for a rational explanation. Most results pointed to plumbing issues or wind trapped in cavities. One article mentioned sick building syndrome, where poor ventilation caused strange sensations, but nothing matched the rhythmic pulse she'd felt. Frustrated, she closed the laptop and stared at the living room wall. The outline was still there, taunting her. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She decided to investigate the house again, starting with the upstairs. She hadn't explored much beyond her bedroom and the bathroom, assuming the other rooms were empty. The staircase creaked under her weight, each step amplifying the house's silence. At the top was a narrow hallway, lined with closed doors, their paint chipped and gray. The air was colder here, heavy with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. Lila opened the first door to find a small empty room, its wallpaper peeling in long strips. The second room was the same, though a cracked mirror leaned against one wall, reflecting her pale face. The third door was stuck. Lila pushed harder, her shoulder against the wood, and it gave with a groan. The room beyond was different. It was larger, with a single window covered by a tattered curtain. The wallpaper here was darker, a deep burgundy that seemed to absorb the light. In the center of the room was a wooden chair, its legs scarred and uneven. The air felt thick, and the rhythmic pulse was back, stronger than ever. In, out, in, out. Lila's chest tightened. She stepped inside, her sneakers silent on the warped floorboards, and noticed something on the far wall. Another outline, like the one downstairs but clearer, a door shape, its edges sharp against the burgundy wallpaper. She approached, her breath shallow, and pressed her hand against it. The wall was cold, but it pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat under skin. She pulled her hand back, her mind racing. Two outlines now, in different parts of the house. Were there more? She returned to the hallway, checking the other doors, but they led to empty rooms or closets. The pulse followed her, a constant hum that seemed to grow louder with each step. Downstairs, she checked the kitchen, the dining room, even the bathroom. No more outlines, but the walls felt different now, alive in a way she couldn't explain. She avoided the basement. The memory of the warm grate was too fresh, too unsettling. That afternoon, Lila called a local handyman, hoping a professional could explain the noises. The man, a gruff older guy named Tom, arrived with a toolbox and a skeptical frown. "Old houses creak," he said, tapping the living room wall with a hammer. "Pipes, joists, maybe rats. Nothing to worry about." Lila didn't mention the breathing or the outlines, afraid he'd think she was crazy. Tom checked the plumbing and the vents, finding nothing unusual. When he left, the house felt emptier, as if it had been holding its breath while he was there. As night fell, Leila lit another candle, its glow a small comfort against the growing dark. She sat in the living room, avoiding the couch where she'd spent the previous night. The outline on the wall seemed sharper now, its edges glowing faintly in the candlelight. She tried to focus on a book, but the words blurred. The pulse was louder, more insistent, and the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. Then she heard it, a sound, not the rhythmic whisper from before, but something new, a soft, deliberate scratch, like fingernails dragging across wood. It was coming from the wall with the outline. Lila froze, her book slipping to the floor. The scratching stopped, then started again, slower, more deliberate. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm, like someone was trying to communicate. She stood, her legs unsteady, and approached the wall. The candlelight flickered, casting her shadow across the wallpaper. She pressed her ear against the outline, holding her breath. The scratching was clearer now, accompanied by a faint hum, like a voice too soft to understand. She pulled back, her heart pounding. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a single sharp tap, like a knuckle against the other side of the wall. Lila stumbled back, her candle nearly tipping over. The house was silent again, but the air felt charged, expectant. She didn't sleep that night, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her eyes fixed on the outline. The scratching didn't return, but the pulse remained, a constant reminder that the house was watching. By morning, she was exhausted but determined. She couldn't leave, not yet. The house had secrets, and she needed to know what they were. She decided to start with the previous owner. Margaret Hale's obituary had mentioned no family, but someone in town might know more. Lila drove to the local library, a small brick building with creaky floors and a musty smell. The librarian, an older woman with wire-rimmed glasses, remembered Margaret. "Odd woman," she said, her voice low. "Lived in that house for decades. People said she was grieving, but no one knew for what. She stopped coming to town years before she died." The librarian paused, then added, "There was a story, probably nonsense, about her digging in the basement. Never said why." Lila's stomach twisted. The basement, the grate. She thanked the librarian and left, her mind buzzing. Back home, the house felt different, as if it knew she'd been asking questions. The pulse was waiting for her, steady and unyielding. in, out. And the outline on the living room wall seemed darker, as if it was growing stronger. Lila Harper stood in the living room, the morning light doing little to soften the outline on the wall. It was darker now, the edges more defined, as if the house was slowly revealing itself. The rhythmic pulse, in, out, had become a constant companion, like a heartbeat she couldn't escape. The librarian's words echoed in her mind. Margaret Hale, digging in the basement. Lila hadn't returned to the basement since her first visit, but the memory of the warm grate and the heavy air clung to her. She knew she'd have to go back. The house was pulling her there, whether she liked it or not. She spent the morning distracting herself with work, editing a manuscript with mechanical focus. But her eyes kept drifting to the wall, to the outline that seemed to watch her as much as she watched it. The scratching from the night before hadn't returned, but the single tap, sharp, deliberate, replayed in her head. It wasn't random. Something or someone was on the other side. The thought made her skin crawl, but it also sparked a stubborn curiosity. Lila wasn't the type to run from a mystery, even one that made her heart race. By noon, she couldn't avoid it any longer. She grabbed her phone for its flashlight and a crowbar from the toolbox the movers had left behind. The basement door loomed at the end of the hallway, its chipped paint like a warning. The knob was colder than she remembered, biting into her palm. The door creaked open, releasing that same musty smell. Damp earth, decay, and something sharper, almost alive. The stairs groaned under her weight, each step amplifying the pulse that seemed to emanate from below. In, out, in, out. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the concrete walls and scattered debris she'd seen before. The circular grate in the center of the floor was still there, its rusted bars glinting faintly. Lila knelt beside the grate, her crowbar heavy in her hand. The air was thicker here, pressing against her chest. She shone her light into the pit below, expecting the same dirt and cobwebs. But something was different. The dirt looked disturbed, uneven, as if someone had been digging and then smoothed it over. Her pulse quickened. She gripped the crowbar and wedged it under the edge of the grate, prying upward. The metal resisted, then gave with a screech that echoed in the silence. The grate was heavier than it looked, and as she dragged it aside, a wave of warm air rose from the pit, carrying a faint, sour scent. The pit was deeper than she'd thought, maybe 5 feet now, its walls rough and uneven. The dirt at the bottom was loose, and in the center, partially buried, was something pale and angular. Lila leaned closer, her flashlight trembling. It was a bone. Not animal, she realized with a jolt. Too long, too straight. A human femur, half covered in dirt. Her breath caught, and she stumbled back, the crowbar clattering to the floor. The pulse surged, louder, faster, as if the house itself was reacting. In, out, in, out. She grabbed her phone and snapped a photo, her hands shaking. She needed proof, something to show she wasn't imagining this. Back upstairs, Lila locked the basement door, though she knew it was pointless. The house didn't need doors to make its presence felt. She sat at the dining table, staring at the photo on her phone. The bone was unmistakable, its surface stained but intact. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was old from a time before the house was built, or a medical specimen left behind. But the disturbed dirt suggested otherwise. Someone had been down there recently. Margaret Hale, or someone else. Lila searched online for missing persons in the area, her fingers clumsy on the keyboard. The results were vague. cases from decades ago, none linked to Willow Lane. She found a local history blog mentioning the house, claiming it had been built in the 1920s for a wealthy family who vanished during the Depression. The blog speculated about financial ruin or foul play, but there were no details. Lila's eyes kept drifting to the basement door, its presence like a weight at the edge of her vision. The pulse was softer now, but it was still there, a reminder that the house was listening. That evening, Lila avoided the living room and its ominous outline. She ate dinner in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator a small comfort. But as the sky darkened, the house seemed to come alive. The pulse grew stronger, and the air felt charged like the moment before a lightning strike. She lit a candle, its flame steady despite the growing unease. Then she heard it again, the scratching, slow and deliberate. But this time it wasn't coming from the living room. It was upstairs, faint but unmistakable, like nails dragging across wood. Lila gripped the crowbar and climbed the stairs, her flashlight beam dancing across the walls. The hallway was colder than before, the metallic scent stronger. The scratching was coming from the room with the burgundy wallpaper, the one with the second outline. She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, then pushed the door open. The room was unchanged. The wooden chair, the tattered curtain, the dark wallpaper. But the outline on the wall was sharper, its edges almost glowing in the dim light. The scratching stopped as she entered, replaced by a low hum, like a voice caught in a throat. She approached the outline, her crowbar raised. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Silence. Then a tap, sharp, like the one from the living room wall. It came from the outline, as if something was knocking from the other side. Lila's heart pounded, but she didn't back away. She pressed her hand against the wall, expecting the same softness as before. This time it was different. The wall was warm, pliable, and it seemed to move under her touch, a slow ripple like water. She yanked her hand back, gasping. The hum grew louder, forming a wordless murmur that filled the room. Lila fled, slamming the door behind her. She spent the night in the kitchen, the crowbar across her lap, the candle burning low. The pulse never stopped, and the murmurs followed her, soft and insistent, like voices just out of reach. By morning, she was exhausted but resolute. She couldn't ignore the bone, the outlines, or the house's growing presence. She needed help. She called Tom, the handyman, again, this time asking about hidden rooms or sealed passages. He sounded skeptical but agreed to come by. When he arrived, Lila showed him the outline in the living room, avoiding the basement and the upstairs room. Tom tapped the wall, frowning. "Could be a false panel," he said, "but it's solid. No seams." He pressed harder, and for a moment, Lila thought she saw the wall ripple. Tom didn't notice. He checked the upstairs room too, but the outline there was fainter in daylight, and he dismissed it as water damage. "Old houses play tricks," he said before leaving. Lila didn't mention the bone. She wasn't ready to explain that yet. Alone again, Lila stood in the living room, staring at the outline. The pulse was stronger now, syncing with her heartbeat. In, out, in, out. The murmurs were back, softer but clearer, like whispers in a language she didn't understand. And then she saw it, a new outline, this one in the kitchen, faint but growing. The house was changing, and it wanted her to know. Lila Harper stood frozen in the kitchen, her eyes locked on the new outline forming on the wall. It was fainter than the others, a ghostly rectangle barely visible against the peeling paint, but it was there. The house was speaking to her, marking itself with these strange door-like shapes. The rhythmic pulse, in, out, thrummed through the air, stronger now, as if the walls were growing bolder. The murmurs, those soft, wordless whispers, seemed to weave through the pulse, curling around her like smoke. Lila's hands trembled, but she didn't run. The house had her in its grip, and she was too deep in its mystery to turn back. The discovery of the bone in the basement weighed heavily on her. She hadn't touched the grate again, hadn't dared to dig deeper, but the image of that pale femur haunted her. It was proof that the house's secrets weren't just in her head. Someone had been buried down there, or hidden, and the disturbed dirt suggested it wasn't ancient history. Lila's mind churned with questions. Was it Margaret Hale's doing? Had the reclusive old woman been hiding something? Or someone in the depths of the house? Or was the house itself the culprit, alive in a way no rational mind could accept? Lila spent the morning avoiding the outlines, focusing on small tasks to ground herself. She washed dishes, swept the floors, and moved a few boxes to the attic. The attic was a cramped space, accessible by a pull-down ladder in the hallway. It smelled of dust and old wood, its slanted ceiling lined with exposed beams. The pulse was fainter here, almost absent, and for a moment, Lila felt like she could breathe. She found a cardboard box tucked in a corner, its edges softened by time. Inside were papers, letters, receipts, and a small leather-bound journal. The handwriting was spidery, faded, but legible. The name on the first page stopped her cold. Margaret Hale. The journal wasn't a diary, not exactly. It was a collection of notes, fragmented and erratic, as if written in a hurry. Lila sat cross-legged on the attic floor, her phone's flashlight illuminating the pages. Margaret wrote about the house, calling it restless and hungry. One entry read, "The walls move when I sleep. They know I'm here. I hear them at night, breathing, always breathing." Another mentioned the basement. "I dug where it told me. I found it. I can't unsee it." The word "it" was underlined twice, but there was no explanation. Lila's stomach twisted. Margaret had known something, felt something, just as she did now. The final entry was dated a month before Margaret's death. "I sealed it. The doors won't stay closed forever. It wants out." Lila closed the journal, her heart pounding. Sealed what? The outlines? The bone? She tucked the journal under her arm and climbed down from the attic, the pulse greeting her as soon as her feet touched the hallway floor. In, out, in, out. The murmurs were louder now, forming shapes that weren't quite words but felt like pleas. She placed the journal on the dining table, its presence like a weight in the room. That afternoon, Lila decided to confront the outlines. She started in the living room, where the first one had appeared. The shape was clearer now, almost three-dimensional, as if the wall was thinning. She pressed her hand against it, bracing for the softness she'd felt before. The wall was warm, pulsing faintly, and it gave slightly under her touch. The murmurs surged, a chorus of whispers that seemed to come from inside the wall. Lila pulled back, her breath shallow. She moved to the kitchen, where the new outline was still faint but growing. It felt different, cooler, less pliable, but the pulse was there, steady and unyielding. The upstairs room with the burgundy wallpaper was the worst. The outline there was the sharpest, its edges glowing faintly even in daylight. The air in the room was heavy, the metallic scent stronger. Lila stood before the outline, the crowbar in her hand, and hesitated. The journal's words echoed in her mind. The doors won't stay closed forever. Was this a door? And if she opened it, what would she find? She raised the crowbar, her arms trembling, and tapped the wall. The sound was hollow, like knocking on a drum. The murmurs stopped, and for a moment the house was silent. Then a response, a single sharp tap from the other side. Lila dropped the crowbar, her pulse racing. The tap wasn't random. It was deliberate, like an answer. She backed out of the room, slamming the door, and stood in the hallway, her breath ragged. The pulse returned, faster now, syncing with her heartbeat. The house was reacting, and she was part of it. She couldn't stay upstairs. She retreated to the kitchen, where the new outline seemed to watch her from the corner of her eye. That night, Lila didn't light a candle. The darkness felt safer, less revealing. She sat on the couch, the journal open on her lap, though she didn't read it. The pulse filled the house, a constant rhythm that seemed to vibrate through her bones. The murmurs were clearer now, forming fragments of sound, syllables, not words, but close. She closed her eyes, trying to block them out, but they followed her into the dark. And then a new sound, a creak, slow and deliberate, like a door opening upstairs. Lila's eyes snapped open. The house was dark, the pulse loud in her ears. The creak came again, followed by a soft thud, like something heavy settling. It was coming from the burgundy room. She grabbed her phone and the crowbar, her hands shaking, and climbed the stairs. The hallway was colder than ever, the air thick with that metallic scent. The door to the burgundy room was ajar, though she was certain she'd closed it. She pushed it open, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The outline on the wall was glowing, a soft, sickly light that pulsed in time with the house's breath. The wooden chair in the center of the room was tipped over, as if someone had knocked it aside. The murmurs were louder here, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Lila approached the outline, her crowbar raised. The wall was warm, almost hot, and it rippled under her gaze, like skin stretching over something alive. She pressed her hand against it, and the murmurs formed a single, clear word. Open. Lila stumbled back, her flashlight dropping to the floor. The word echoed in her mind, not in her ears but in her chest, as if the house had spoken directly to her. The pulse surged, faster, louder, and the outline seemed to bulge, as if something was pushing from the other side. She ran, slamming the door behind her, and didn't stop until she was in the living room, her breath coming in gasps. The pulse followed her, the murmurs now a constant hum, and the outlines, living room, kitchen, upstairs, seemed to glow in her mind's eye. By morning, Lila was a wreck. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. The journal lay open on the table, its pages a grim reminder of Margaret's warnings. The house was alive, and it wanted something from her. She couldn't leave, not yet. The bone, the outlines, the murmurs. They were pieces of a puzzle, and she was too stubborn to walk away. But she needed help, someone who knew more than Tom the handyman. She needed to find out what Margaret had sealed and what the house was trying to set free. Lila Harper sat at the dining table, the journal open before her, its pages a lifeline to understanding the house's relentless grip. The word open still echoed in her mind, a command whispered by the walls themselves. The rhythmic pulse, in, out, had become her shadow, a constant presence that seemed to seep into her thoughts. The outlines on the walls, now in the living room, kitchen and upstairs, were growing sharper, their glow faintly visible even in daylight. The house was no longer hiding. It was beckoning. Sleep was a distant memory. Lila's eyes burned, her body heavy with exhaustion, but fear and curiosity kept her moving. The Bone in the Basement, Margaret Hale's cryptic journal, the murmurs that formed words, these were clues and she couldn't walk away. Not yet. The house wanted something from her, and she needed to know what. But she couldn't do it alone anymore. Tom the handyman had been useless, dismissing the outlines as tricks of an old house. She needed someone who wouldn't laugh, someone who might believe the impossible. Lila drove to the local library again, the journal tucked into her bag. The librarian, Miss Carter, was there, her wire-rimmed glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights. Lila hesitated, then showed her the journal, explaining Margaret's strange entries without mentioning the breathing walls or the bone. Miss Carter frowned, turning the pages carefully. Margaret was a mystery, she said. People said she was eccentric, maybe unwell. But this, she tapped an entry about the basement. This sounds like she was afraid of something. There were rumors she was involved in odd rituals, but no one took them seriously. Rituals? Lila's voice was steady, though her pulse quickened. Miss Carter shrugged. Just talk. People said she was seen buying candles, salt, strange things. They thought she was warding off spirits. She paused, then added, There's a man in town, Elias Gray. He's a bit of a recluse, but he knows the town's history, used to be a professor. If anyone knows about Margaret or that house, it's him. Lila left with Elias Gray's address, a farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The drive was quiet, the autumn trees a blur of red and gold. The pulse followed her, faint but persistent, as if the house was tethered to her. Elias's farmhouse was weathered, its porch sagging under the weight of old planters. He answered the door, a tall man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a gray beard. Lila explained her situation carefully, moving into the house, finding the journal, Margaret's cryptic notes. She left out the outlines and the murmurs, but Elias's expression darkened as she spoke. That house, he said, his voice low, has a history no one likes to talk about. The family who built it in the 20s, the Warrens, disappeared. Not just left, vanished. No bodies, no trace. The town blamed debt, but there were stories, whispers about the house being wrong. He leaned forward. Margaret came later in the 50s. She was private, but I met her once. She asked me about old rituals, ways to bind something to a place. I thought she was just curious. Now I'm not so sure. Lila's throat tightened. Bind something? Elias nodded. She talked about sealing doors, keeping something in. I didn't press her. Maybe I should have. He studied Lila's face. You've seen something, haven't you? She hesitated, then nodded. The walls? They feel alive. And there are outlines like doors. Elias's eyes narrowed. Don't open them, he said sharply. If Margaret sealed something, it's for a reason. Come back tomorrow. I'll look into it. Lila drove home, her mind buzzing. The house greeted her with its pulse, stronger now, and the outlines seemed to hum with anticipation. She avoided the upstairs room, where the word open had formed, and stayed in the living room. The journal lay open, its pages a grim reminder of Margaret's fear. Lila read an entry she'd missed. The walls want blood. They always have. I gave them mine, but it's not enough. Her stomach churned. Blood? Was that why Margaret dug in the basement? Had she buried something or someone to appease the house? That night the house was restless. The pulse was louder, the murmurs clearer, forming fragments of sentences. Open, come, stay. Lila lit a candle, its flame flickering as if caught in a draft. The outline in the living room glowed softly, its edges rippling like liquid. She heard a new sound, a soft, rhythmic thud, like footsteps coming from the kitchen. She grabbed her crowbar and crept toward the sound. The kitchen outline was brighter, its shape almost solid. The thudding stopped, replaced by a faint scraping, like something dragging across the floor. Lila's flashlight beam swept the room, finding nothing but the outline. She approached it, her crowbar raised and pressed her ear to the wall. The murmurs were loud, a chorus of voices that seemed to pull at her. Open. Now the wall was warm, pulsing, and it moved under her touch, a slow undulation that made her skin crawl. She stepped back, her breath ragged, and noticed something new, a thin crack along the outline, barely visible, like a seam splitting open. The air grew colder, the metallic scent sharper, and the murmurs formed a new word. Yours. Lila fled to the living room, her heart pounding. The outlines were changing, becoming doors, and the house was speaking to her directly. She didn't sleep, sitting on the couch with the crowbar across her lap. The pulse was relentless, the murmurs a constant hum. By morning she was drained, but Elias's warning echoed in her mind. Don't open them. She needed to know what Margaret had sealed, and way the house wanted her to undo it. Lila returned to Elias's farmhouse, her hands shaking as she recounted the night's events. The crack, the word yours, the footsteps. Elias's face was grim. The house is waking, he said. The Warrens, Margaret. They all try to contain it. Whatever's in those walls, it's old, and it's tied to the land. He showed her a book, its pages yellowed, detailing local folklore. One passage described a living house on Willow Lane, built over a site where blood had been spilled. Sacrifices, maybe, from a time before the town existed. Margaret might have sealed it with a ritual, Elias said, but seals weaken, and you living there, it's stirring. Lila's mind reeled. The bone in the basement, was it part of the seal, or a victim of the house's hunger? Elias promised to dig deeper, but he urged her to leave. It's not safe, he said. The house wants you. Lila shook her head. She couldn't leave, not yet. The house had chosen her, and she needed to know why. Back home, the pulse was waiting, louder, more insistent. The crack in the kitchen outline had widened, a thin line of darkness that seemed to pulse with the house's breath. The living room outline was splitting too, and upstairs the burgundy room's outline glowed like a wound. The murmurs were constant now, a chant of open, yours come. Lila stood in the living room, the journal in her hands, and felt the house's gaze. It wasn't just alive, it was hungry, and it was calling her name. Lila Harper stood in the living room, the journal clutched to her chest like a shield. The house's pulse, in, out, vibrated through her, a rhythm that felt as much a part of her now as her own heartbeat. The outlines on the walls, now cracked and glowing, were no longer just shapes. They were doors, or something worse, and the house was urging her to open them. The murmurs had grown into a chorus, their words, open, yours, come, weaving through the air like a lullaby she couldn't ignore. The cracks in the outlines, thin but widening, seemed to breathe with the house, exhaling a faint, sour scent that made her stomach turn. Elias's warning echoed in her mind. The house wants you. She'd dismissed the idea of leaving, her stubbornness outweighing her fear, but now doubt crept in. The bone in the basement, Margaret Hale's journal, the folklore about a living house. It all pointed to something ancient, something hungry. Lila wasn't sure she could face it alone, but she wasn't ready to run, not yet. The house had chosen her, and she needed to understand why. She spent the morning in the attic, the only place where the pulse felt muted. The journal lay open on the dusty floor, its pages a map of Margaret's descent into fear. Lila reread the entries, searching for clues. One passage stood out. The walls take what you give. Blood calls to blood. I try to stop it, but it remembers. The words chilled her. Margaret had given blood, her own, or someone else's, to appease the house. The bone in the basement, was it part of that offering? Lila's mind flashed to the disturbed dirt, the warm grate. She needed to go back down there, to see if there were more answers buried in the pit. Lila grabbed her crowbar and phone, her hand steadier than she expected. The basement door resisted at first, its knob icy despite the warm September air. When it finally opened, the familiar smell of damp earth and decay hit her, sharper now, tinged with that sour note. The stairs creaked, each step amplifying the pulse. In, out, in, out. The basement was darker than before, the shadows thicker, as if the house was drawing them in. The grate lay where she'd left it, askew, revealing the pit below. The dirt was more disturbed now, churned and uneven, as if something had been moving beneath it. Lila knelt beside the pit, her flashlight beam trembling. The bone was still there, half buried, but now she saw others, smaller fragments, scattered like broken porcelain, a rib, a vertebra, maybe a finger bone. Her breath caught. This wasn't one body, it was several. The pulse surged, loud in her ears, and the murmurs formed a new phrase. See us. Lila's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. She snapped photos, her hands shaking, then used the crowbar to gently shift the dirt. The deeper she dug, the more she found. Bones, cloth scraps, a rusted locket. The locket was small, heart-shaped, its clasp stuck. She pried it open, revealing a faded photo of a young woman, her face solemn. The back was engraved, E.W., 1928. Lila's mind raced. E.W., one of the Warrens, the family who'd vanished? The house had been built for them, Elias had said. Had they been buried here, hidden by the house or by Margaret? The pulse grew faster, the murmurs louder, as if the house was pleased she'd found the locket. See us, know us. Lila pocketed the locket and backed away, her flashlight beam catching the walls. They seemed to shimmer, their concrete surface rippling faintly, like water disturbed by a stone. She ran upstairs, locking the door behind her, though she knew it was futile. The house didn't need to chase her. It was everywhere. Back in the living room, Lila spread the journal and locket on the table. The cracks in the outlines had widened, thin lines of darkness that seemed to pulse with the house's breath. The murmurs were constant now, a chant that followed her from room to room. She called Elias, her voice shaking as she described the bones and the locket. Don't touch anything else, he said, his tone urgent. I found something, a ritual in an old text. It's about binding a presence to a place, using blood and bone. Margaret might have tried it, but it's failing. I'm coming over. Stay away from the walls. Lila waited, her eyes fixed on the living room outline. The crack was wider, a jagged line that seemed to glow from within. The pulse was relentless, the murmurs forming new words. Give, stay. She tried to ignore them, focusing on the locket. The woman's face, E.W., haunted her. Was she one of the Warrens trapped by the house? Or had she been part of whatever ritual Margaret had performed? The journal offered no answers, only warnings. It remembers. It waits. Elias arrived an hour later. a leather-bound book under his arm. His face was pale, his eyes scanning the room. "You feel it, don't you?" he said, nodding toward the outline. "It's stronger now." Lila showed him the locket and described the bones. Elias's expression darkened. "The Warrens," he said, "they didn't vanish. They were sacrificed, maybe to keep the house quiet. Margaret must have found their remains and tried to seal it." He opened his book, revealing pages of handwritten notes and diagrams. "This ritual, it binds a spirit, or something older, to a place, but it needs blood and it needs a keeper. Margaret was the keeper, and now it's me," Lila finished, her voice barely a whisper. Elias didn't contradict her. He traced a diagram in the book, a circle with symbols she didn't recognize. "We can reinforce the seal," he said, "but it's dangerous. If we fail, the house will take what it wants." Lila's mind flashed to the journal. "The walls take what you give." She nodded, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let the house win. That night, Elias prepared the ritual. He drew a circle in salt on the living room floor, placing candles at 5 points. The outlines glowed brighter, their cracks widening, as if the house knew what they were doing. The pulse was deafening, the murmurs a roar. "Give, open, stay." Elias chanted softly, his voice steady, while Lila held the locket, its metal warm in her hand. The air grew heavy, the metallic scent overwhelming. The walls rippled, their surfaces shifting like skin, and the cracks in the outlines began to bleed. A slow trickle of dark, viscous liquid that smelled of iron and decay. Lila's heart raced, but she stayed in the circle, following Elias's instructions. He sprinkled salt along the cracks, his chants growing louder. The murmurs turned to screams, wordless but anguished, and the pulse faltered, skipping like a failing heart. The house was fighting back. The candles flickered, their flames bending toward the outlines. Elias shouted a final phrase and the cracks sealed, the dark liquid retreating. The pulse slowed, the murmurs faded, and the outlines dimmed, their glow reduced to a faint shimmer. Lila collapsed, her breath ragged. Elias looked drained, his hands trembling. "It's not over," he said. "The seal is stronger, but it's temporary. The house is still here, and it still wants you." Lila nodded, her eyes on the locket. The woman's face, EW, seemed to watch her, a silent witness to the house's hunger. The pulse was faint now, but it wasn't gone. The house was waiting, and Lila knew it wasn't done with her. Lila Harper sat on the living room floor, the salt circle scattered around her, its grains glinting in the dim light. The outlines on the walls, living room, kitchen, upstairs, were quieter now, their cracks sealed, their glow reduced to a faint shimmer. The pulse, in, out, had softened, a distant hum rather than a commanding rhythm. The murmurs, those relentless whispers of open, yours, give, had faded to a barely audible sigh. But Lila knew better than to trust the calm. The house was still alive, still watching, and Elias's ritual had only bought her time. Elias stood by the window, his leather-bound book tucked under his arm, his face etched with exhaustion. "The seal won't last forever," he said, his voice hoarse. "A month, maybe 2. The house is too strong, too old. It's been here longer than the Warrens, longer than Margaret." Lila clutched the locket, its metal warm against her palm. The face of EW, the solemn woman from 1928, seemed to stare through her, a reminder of the house's long memory. "What do I do?" Lila asked. Elias hesitated, then said, "You can leave. Break the connection, or you stay and fight, but that means finding the source." "The source?" Lila's mind flashed to the basement, the bones, The disturbed dirt. Elias nodded. Whatever's driving the house, it's down there. Margaret found it, tried to bind it. You saw the bones. They're part of it, but not all. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. If you stay, you're risking more than your life. The house wants a keeper, and it's chosen you. Lila's throat tightened. The journal's words echoed. Blood calls to blood. She wasn't ready to give up, but the weight of the house's hunger was crushing. Elias left, promising to return with more information. Lila locked the door behind him, though she knew it was pointless. The house didn't need doors to reach her. She spent the day avoiding the outlines, focusing on mundane tasks, making tea, sorting papers, anything to feel normal. But the locket stayed in her pocket, a constant reminder of the Warrens and their fate. She opened it again, studying E.W.'s face. The engraving, E.W. 1928, felt like a clue. But to what? She searched online for the Warrens, finding only a brief mention in a local archive. Edward and Clara Warren, with their daughter Elizabeth, vanished in 1930. House on Willow Lane abandoned. Elizabeth Warren. E.W. Lila's stomach twisted. The locket belonged to the daughter, buried in the basement. That evening the house stirred. The pulse grew stronger, a slow thrum that seemed to rise from the floor. The murmurs returned, soft but persistent, whispering, no, see, stay. Lila lit a candle, its flames steady but small against the growing dark. The outlines were glowing again, faintly, their cracks still sealed but straining, like skin stretched too tight. She avoided the kitchen and upstairs, staying in the living room, where the outline was the least active. But the house had other ways to reach her. As the candle burned low, Lila heard a new sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like rain on a window, but it was coming from the basement. She froze, her hand tightening around the locket. The tapping grew louder, more deliberate, like footsteps pacing below. The pulse surged, the murmurs forming a new word. Find. Lila's heart pounded, but she couldn't ignore it. The basement was calling her, just as the outlines had. She grabbed her crowbar and phone, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom as she opened the basement door. The air was heavier than before, thick with a sour, metallic scent. The stairs groaned, each step amplifying the pulse. In, out, in, out. The tapping stopped as she reached the bottom, replaced by a low hum, like the house was holding its breath. The pit was unchanged, its bones and cloth scraps glinting in her flashlight's beam. But the dirt was different, mounded in the center, as if something had pushed up from below. Lila's breath caught. She knelt, her crowbar ready, and brushed the dirt aside. Beneath was a wooden panel, its edges rotted but intact, carved with symbols like those in Elias's book. Lila pried the panel loose, her arms trembling. It came free with a groan, revealing a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for a person. The air from below was warm, almost hot, and it pulsed with the house's rhythm. The murmurs were louder here, a chorus of find, no, come. Her flashlight beam caught something in the tunnel, a glint of metal half buried in the dirt. She reached in, her fingers brushing a small rusted key. It was heavy, its surface etched with a symbol that matched the locket's clasp. The pulse surged, the murmurs screaming yours, and the walls of the basement rippled, their concrete surface shifting like liquid. Lila scrambled back, clutching the key. The tunnel seemed to breathe, exhaling that sour, metallic air. She ran upstairs, slamming the door, and stood in the living room, her breath ragged. The outlines were brighter now, their cracks splitting open, thin lines of darkness leaking that same dark, viscous liquid from the ritual. The pulse was deafening, the murmurs a chant. Open, find, stay. The key felt alive in her hand, warm and pulsing, as if it belonged to the house. She called Elias, her voice shaking as she described the tunnel and the key. "Don't use it," he said, his tone urgent. "It's part of the seal. If you unlock something, you're letting it out." Lila looked at the locket, then the key. They were connected. To Elizabeth Warren, to the bones, to the house's hunger. "What is it?" she asked. Elias hesitated. "I don't know yet. Something old, something that feeds on blood and bone. Margaret bound it, but it's waking. I'll be there tomorrow. Stay away from the basement." Lila didn't sleep that night. She sat on the couch, the key and locket on the table, the journal open beside them. The pulse filled the house, the murmurs a constant hum. The outlines glowed, their cracks widening, and the tapping returned, now from the kitchen. It was slower, more deliberate, like someone knocking. "Find, no, yours." The house was calling her, and the key seemed to hum in response, its warmth spreading through the air. By morning, Lila was exhausted but resolute. She couldn't wait for Elias. The house wouldn't let her. She drove to the library, hoping Ms. Carter could help with the symbols on the key and locket. The librarian frowned, tracing the etchings. "They're old," she said. "Not local, maybe pre-Christian, tied to blood rituals." She showed Lila a book on ancient symbols, pointing to one that matched, a circle with a jagged line, meaning binding or release. Lila's heart sank. The key wasn't just part of the seal, it was the way to break it. Back home, the house was waiting. The pulse was louder, the outlines brighter, their cracks bleeding that dark liquid. The tapping was constant now, coming from every outline. Living room, kitchen, upstairs. The murmurs formed a new phrase: "Use it." Lila held the key, its warmth pulsing in her hand, and felt the house's gaze. The locket lay open, Elizabeth Warren's face watching her. The journal's warning echoed. It remembers. It waits. Lila knew she was standing on the edge of something vast, something that could swallow her whole. But she couldn't turn back. The house had her, and it wasn't letting go. Lila Harper stood in the living room, the key heavy in her hand, its etched symbol pulsing with a warmth that felt almost alive. The house's pulse, in, out, throbbed through the air, syncing with her heartbeat, as if she and the house were one. The outlines on the walls, living room, kitchen, upstairs, glowed brighter, their cracks widening, leaking that dark, viscous liquid that smelled of iron and decay. The murmurs had become a relentless chant. "Use it, open, yours," weaving through the air like a siren's call. The locket lay open on the table, Elizabeth Warren's face a silent witness to the house's growing hunger. Lila's mind was a storm of fear and determination. The key, the bones, the journal, the symbols, they all pointed to a truth she could barely grasp. The house wasn't just alive, it was a prison, or a host, for something ancient, something that fed on blood and bone. Margaret Hale had bound it, Elias had said, but the seal was breaking, and Lila was the key's new keeper. Ms. Carter's words haunted her, binding or release. The key could lock the house's secret away or set it free, and every fiber of her being screamed to leave it alone. But the house wouldn't let her. It was in her head, her blood, her breath. She spent the morning pacing, avoiding the outlines as their glow intensified. The tapping from the walls was constant now, a rhythmic knock that seemed to follow her from room to room. Use it. Know it. The journal offered no new answers, its pages a litany of Margaret's fear and cryptic warnings. The walls take what you give, it remembers. Lila's eyes kept drifting to the locket. Elizabeth Warren, E.W., the daughter who'd vanished with her family in 1930. Her bones were in the basement, buried with others, a sacrifice to the house's hunger. But why? What had the Warrens done to awaken this thing? Lila called Elias, her voice trembling as she described the key's warmth and the widening cracks. "Don't touch the outlines," he said, his tone sharp. "The key's tied to the ritual. If you use it, you're not just opening a door, you're opening the house." She asked what he meant, but he was vague. "I'm still researching. The symbols suggest a blood pact, something older than the town. Stay put. I'll be there by evening." Lila hung up, frustration gnawing at her. Elias knew more than he was saying, but the house wasn't giving her time to wait. By afternoon, the house was restless. The pulse was louder, the air heavy with that sour, metallic scent. The outline's cracks were splitting further, the dark liquid pooling on the floor in small, glistening puddles. Lila avoided stepping in it, her stomach churning at the thought of what it might be. The tapping grew frantic, like hands pounding from the other side, and the murmurs formed new words. Now. Give. She clutched the key, its warmth spreading up her arm, and felt a pull, like the house was guiding her hand. The living room outline was the brightest, its crack wide enough to see a faint, pulsing darkness beyond, like a heartbeat in a void. Lila's resolve wavered, but curiosity held her fast. She needed to know what the house was hiding, what it wanted from her. She moved to the kitchen, where the outline was less intense, hoping for answers without the risk. The crack there was narrower, but the tapping was louder, almost desperate. She pressed her ear to the wall, the key warm in her hand. The murmurs were clear, a chorus of voices, "Open, now, yours," and the wall felt soft, pliable, like flesh. She pulled back, her breath shallow, and noticed something new. A small circular indentation in the wall, barely visible, shaped like the key's head. Her heart pounded. The house was showing her where to use it. She hesitated, Elias's warning ringing in her ears. "You're opening the house." But the pull was too strong, the murmurs too insistent. She raised the key, her hand trembling, and pressed it into the indentation. It fit perfectly, clicking into place with a soft, mechanical thud. The pulse surged, the murmurs screaming yes, and the crack widened, revealing a narrow, dark passage beyond. The air from within was warm, thick with the smell of earth and blood, and the tapping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural hum. Lila stumbled back, the key still in the wall. The passage pulsed with the house's rhythm, its walls slick and glistening, like the inside of a living thing. She grabbed her flashlight, her crowbar, and shone the beam inside. The passage sloped downward, its floor uneven, disappearing into darkness. The murmurs were louder now, coming from within. "Come, see, stay." Lila's instinct screamed to run, but her feet stayed rooted. The house had her, and it wasn't letting go. She stepped into the passage, the air pressing against her like a living thing. The walls were soft, warm, and they rippled under her touch as if breathing. The pulse was deafening, the murmurs a chant that seemed to guide her deeper. The passage twisted, narrowing, until she reached a small, circular chamber, its walls carved with the same symbols as the key and locket. In the center was a stone slab, stained dark with what looked like blood. On it lay a single bone, a skull, its eye sockets staring up at her. The Murmurs formed a name, Elizabeth. Layla's breath caught. Elizabeth Warren, the locket's owner, the daughter whose bones were scattered in the basement. The skull seemed to hum, its surface warm, and the pulse surged, the walls of the chamber contracting like lungs. Give. Stay. Lila backed away, her flashlight trembling, and noticed something else. A faint outline on the chamber wall, like the ones upstairs, but smaller, its crack bleeding that dark liquid. The key in her pocket felt heavier, as if it belonged here too. She ran, scrambling back through the passage, the walls seeming to close in behind her. The kitchen outline was still open, the key glowing faintly in the wall. She yanked it out, and the crack sealed with a groan, the passage vanishing as if it had never been. The pulse slowed, the murmurs fading to a whisper. But the house wasn't done. The outlines upstairs and in the living room glowed brighter, their cracks splitting open, and the tapping resumed, now from every wall. Lila collapsed on the couch, the key and locket in her hands. The skull's empty eyes burned into her mind. The house had shown her something, but not everything. Elizabeth's skull, the blood-stained slab, the symbols, they were pieces of a ritual, a pact that bound the house's hunger. Margaret had tried to seal it, but Lila had opened a door, and something had stirred. The pulse was stronger now, the murmurs clearer. More give, yours. The house wasn't just awake, it was ravenous. Elias arrived that evening, his face pale as Lila described the passage in the chamber. You used the key, he said, his voice heavy with dread. You've weakened the seal further. The house is stronger now. He opened his book, showing her a sketch of a chamber like the one she'd seen, labeled the heart. This is where it lives, he said. The thing in the house. It's not a spirit. It's older, tied to the land, fed by blood. Lila's hand tightened around the locket. What does it want? She asked. Elias's eyes met hers. You, your blood, your life, unless we stop it. Lila Harper sat in the living room, the key and locket clenched in her fists, their warmth a constant reminder of the house's hunger. The pulse, in, out, throbbed through the walls, louder now, as if the house was growing impatient. The outlines, living room, kitchen, upstairs, glowed with a sickly light, their cracks bleeding that dark, viscous liquid that pooled on the floor like spilled ink. The murmurs had become a relentless chant. More give yours, their voices weaving through the air, pulling at her resolve. Elias's words echoed in her mind. The house wants your blood, your life. The chamber she'd found, the blood-stained slab, Elizabeth Warren's skull. It all pointed to a ritual that had bound something ancient to the house, and Lila had unwittingly loosened its chains. Elias stood across the room, his leather-bound book open, his face grim. The heart, he said, tapping the sketch of the chamber. That's where it lives. Not a spirit, but something older, something that feeds on sacrifice. The Warrens gave it blood. Margaret tried to bind it, and now it's calling you. Lila's throat tightened. The locket's engraving, EW 1928, and the key's symbol burned in her memory. Elizabeth Warren had been part of this, her bones buried to appease the house. But why her? And why Lila now? We can't seal it again, Elias continued. Not like Margaret did. The house is too awake. We need to destroy the heart, break the pact. Lila's heart pounded. How? Elias hesitated, his eyes flicking to the key in her hand. The key unlocks the heart, but using it means facing what's inside. It'll try to take you. Lila's mind flashed to the chamber, the skull's empty eyes, the walls that breathed. She wasn't sure she could face it, but the house wasn't giving her a choice. The pulse surged, the murmurs screaming now, and the cracks in the outlines widened, the dark liquid spreading like veins across the floor. Lila and Elias prepared for the ritual. He drew a new salt circle, larger this time, and placed candles at 7 points, their flames flickering as if the house was resisting. The journal lay open. Margaret's warnings a grim guide. Blood calls to blood. It remembers. Elias added symbols to the circle, copying those from the key and locket, chanting softly as he worked. The air grew heavy, the metallic scent overwhelming, and the walls rippled, their surfaces shifting like skin. Lila held the key, its warmth pulsing up her arm, and felt the house's gaze. It knew what they were planning, and it was ready. They moved to the basement, the pulse deafening as they descended. The pit was unchanged, its bones glinting in the flashlight's beam. But a tunnel to the chamber was open, its mouth gaping like a wound. The murmurs were louder here, a chorus of come, give, stay, and the walls of the basement pulsed, their concrete surface soft and warm. Elias sprinkled salt along the tunnel's entrance, his chants growing urgent. Stay in the circle, he said, his voice tense. No matter what you see, don't leave it. Lila nodded, her hand tightening around the key. The locket hung around her neck, Elizabeth Warren's face a silent companion. They entered the tunnel, the air thick and warm, the walls contracting like lungs. The chamber was as Lila remembered, circular, its walls carved with symbols, the blood-stained slab in the center. The skull was still there, its eye sockets glowing faintly, as if alive. The outline on the chamber wall was brighter now, its crack wide and bleeding, a dark void pulsing within. The murmurs formed a name, Elizabeth, and the pulse surged, the chamber walls rippling faster. Lila's heart raced, but she stepped forward, the key burning in her hand. There was an indentation in the slab, small and circular, matching the key's head. Elias began the ritual, his chants echoing in the chamber. He poured salt around the slab, the candles in the circle flaring as he spoke. The house fought back, the pulse skipping, the murmurs turning to screams. No, give, mine. The walls contracted, the crack in the outline widening, and the dark liquid poured out, pooling around the slab. Lila's hand trembled as she approached the indentation. Do it, Elias said, his voice strained. But don't let it take you. She pressed the key into the slab, and it clicked into place with a deep, resonant thud. The chamber shook, the pulse faltering, and the murmurs became a wail. The crack in the outline split open, revealing a void that seemed to swallow light. From within came a sound, a low, guttural hum, like a voice too vast to comprehend. Lila's vision blurred, the locket burning against her chest, and she saw her, Elizabeth Warren, or something wearing her face, standing in the void. Her eyes were empty, her mouth moving, forming words Lila couldn't hear. The house was pulling her, its hunger a physical force, and Lila felt her feet slide toward the void. Elias grabbed her arm, yanking her back into the circle. Focus, he shouted, his chants louder now. The candles flared, their flames bending toward the void, and the walls of the chamber began to crack, dark liquid streaming down like tears. Lila clutched the locket, her mind reeling. Elizabeth's face flickered, replaced by others, men, women, children, their eyes hollow, their mouths chanting, give. The Warrens, the sacrifices, the house's keepers. Lila was next, unless she broke the cycle. The key glowed, its warmth spreading through the slab, and the pulse slowed, the murmurs fading. The void pulsed, its edges shrinking. But the house wasn't done. The slab cracked, the skull rolling to the floor, and the walls of the chamber seemed to scream, their symbols glowing red. Lila's vision darkened, the locket's weight pulling at her, and she heard a whisper, clear and cold. Stay. She gripped Elias's hand, anchoring herself, and shouted, No! The candles went out, and the chamber fell silent. Lila Harper stood in the darkened chamber, the key still embedded in the cracked slab, its glow fading like a dying star. The pulse of the house, in, out, had slowed to a faint tremor, and the murmurs, once a deafening chant, were now a distant whisper, barely audible. The void in the outline had shrunk, its edges sealed, but the air was heavy with the house's lingering presence. The skull of Elizabeth Warren lay at Lila's feet, its glow extinguished, and the locket around her neck was cold, its weight no longer a pull but a reminder. Elias's hand was still on her arm, his grip tight, his breath ragged from the ritual's toll. The chamber was quiet, but the silence felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. The walls no longer rippled, their symbols dim, but the dark liquid that had bled from the cracks remained, pooled around the slab like a wound that wouldn't heal. Lila's heart pounded, her mind reeling from the vision of Elizabeth and the others, faces of the sacrificed bound to the house's hunger. The whisper, "Stay," still echoed in her chest, but she'd resisted. She was still here, still herself, but the house wasn't defeated. It was waiting. Elias released her arm, his face pale in the flashlight's beam. "We heard it," he said, his voice low. "The key locked the heart, but it's not gone. The house is part of it, and it's still alive." Lila looked at the slab, the key now dull and lifeless. "What now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Elias hesitated, his eyes scanning the chamber. "We leave. Burn the house if we can. If not, we make sure no one else becomes its keeper." Lila's stomach twisted. Leave? After everything. The bones, the journal, the ritual. But the thought of staying, of facing the house's hunger again, was unbearable. They climbed out of the tunnel, the basement air cold and still. The outlines upstairs were dim, their cracks sealed, but the pulse lingered, a faint reminder of the house's power. Lila gathered the journal, the locket, and the key, tucking them into her bag. Elias sprinkled salt along the basement stairs, a final barrier, though he admitted it wouldn't hold forever. "The house will try again," he said. "It always does." Lila nodded, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let it take anyone else. They drove to Elias's farmhouse, the night sky heavy with clouds. Lila's hands shook as she recounted the ritual, the void, the faces. Elias listened, his expression grim. "The house was built on something old," he said. "A site of blood, maybe a shrine. The Warrens woke it, Margaret bound it, and you challenged it." He opened his book, showing her a final note. "To end the pact, the heart must burn, but the keeper must give." Lila's blood ran cold. Give what? Her life? She wasn't sure she could pay that price. They returned to the house at dawn, armed with gasoline and matches. The pulse greeted them, faint but persistent, and the outlines glowed softly, as if sensing their intent. Lila poured gasoline in the basement around the pit, while Elias worked upstairs, dousing the outlines. The murmurs returned, soft and pleading. "Stay, keep mine." But Lila ignored them. She stood in the living room, the locket in her hand, and whispered, "This ends now." She struck a match, dropping it into the gasoline. The flames roared to life, spreading fast, the pulse faltering as the house screamed, a soundless wail that shook her bones. They ran, the fire consuming the house behind them. The outlines burned, their cracks collapsing, and the pulse faded, the murmurs silenced. Lila watched from the street, the locket cold against her palm, Elizabeth Warren's face a fading memory. The house was gone, reduced to ash, but the weight of its hunger lingered. Had she truly broken the pact, or had she only delayed it? The key, now dull, felt heavy in her pocket, a reminder that some doors never fully close. Months later, Lila lived in a small apartment far from Willow Lane. The journal was locked in a box, the locket buried in a drawer, the key hidden where no one would find it. She slept better, but never deeply, her dreams haunted by the pulse and the faces in the void. Elias had disappeared, his farmhouse empty, his book gone. The town spoke of the fire as an accident, but Lila knew better. The house had taken something from her, a piece of her courage, her peace, and she wasn't sure she'd ever get it back. One night, as rain tapped her window, Lila woke to a faint sound, a rhythm, soft and familiar. In, out, in, out. She sat up, her heart racing, and checked the drawer. The locket was still there, but the key was warm, its symbol glowing faintly. The pulse was distant, but it was there, calling her. The house was gone, but its hunger wasn't. Somewhere the heart still beat, and it remembered her name.